In this exercise, we're going to enhance this image so it would be at home on the cover of any fashion magazine. And in order to do so, we're going to have to use several different tools in Photoshop. This is also going to give us a good overview of how many of the tools in Photoshop work, how the layers panel works, how some of the adjustment layers work, and we're also going to be looking at history and most of the things in here that you use quite often in Photoshop. So this tutorial will be split into several different parts in order to save disk space and to make the tutorials a little shorter. But we'll be looking at color replacement, the color replacement tool. We'll be looking at how to stack layers, how to move layers around. We'll be looking at cloning, we'll be looking at dodging and burning, using filters, and we're going to use one in particular called surface blur. We're also going to be looking at adding a hue saturation adjustment layer along with some tonal adjustment, and looking at how we can change the opacity of layers as well. So all this is going to be done in Photoshop, and we're not going to be using Lightroom for this as we did in the previous week, even though some of these tools are available in Lightroom. We're going to do it solely in Photoshop though, so you can get some experience using these tools in Photoshop. Here's the image we're going to start out with, and we're going to try to make this image look like this. So we're going to remove all the blemishes, we're going to smooth out her skin so it looks like a magazine portrait. I changed the colors of the eyes to match what she was wearing and brightened up her lips a little bit as well. And see if you can guess what other things I did to this before you get to the end of this tutorial. We're going to start out with a fresh image here, and after you download this from the website, this is what you're going to start out with. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to get the color even. Her face has a lot of different coloring in it, and if we smooth everything out without getting the color the same, it's just not going to look very well. So the first thing that we want to do is use a tool called the color replacement tool. This isn't the only way to get the color out of her face. There's a couple other ways of doing it, but this is the way we're going to do it and what we're going to look at. Before we do that though, we're going to make a couple new layers. We're going to duplicate the layers here in order to put different things on different layers. And this is a really good workflow, a good way of working on your images, because then you always have something to go back to or fall back on. So I want to duplicate the original layer here, and this is in my layers panel here. And if your layers panel isn't open here, what you want to do is go to Window, and you want to find Workspace, and you want to select Essentials. If you select Essentials, your desktop will look like mine, and we're going to have all the similar types of properties. Now, we're going to have a couple different panels here, and that may not be open by default, but the one that's most important for you is going to be the History panel. And by default, again, if you have the Essentials workspace open, you can see the History panel is right here, and if I click on it, what it's going to do is going to allow me to be able to step back in the steps that I've done if I need to, if I did something that I don't like. Now, by default, if we go to our preferences, and this is in a different place on a Mac, but if we go to preferences and we go to performance, I think by default your history states there's only like 20 or 25 set. I have mine bumped up to 180. I got a lot of memory, so that works fine for my computer. I left the cache levels where they were and the tile size as well. But that means I have 180 undos, if you will. So I highly recommend that you get at least 100, and you'll see that you'll use those up really fast. The other thing that I recommend here is that you change your cursors, and it's really nice to see the brush tip size when you're painting stuff on with the brush, and also knowing where the middle of the brush is, so that's why I put a crosshair. And then same with the other cursors, having a precise cursor makes it much easier to get stuff where you want it. And pretty much that's all you need to look at here for now in the preferences. Oh, I'm sorry, there's one thing I did forget. If we go to General here, this history log is pretty valuable. If you turn this on with metadata and then detailed, Photoshop will keep a record of everything that you did on your image, and it will keep it in a tiny little metadata file in your image. It's not going to add anything noticeable to the size of your file, but it's something that you could go back on and see what you did in the image later on. You're not going to be able to use it to undo anything, but it can tell you what you did if you're trying to replicate something and you can't remember what you did and you want to replicate it. So I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to get started. I'm going to make a couple layers. Now there's a couple different ways we can make layers. We can go up to the layer panel and we can say new layer. We can duplicate layer, which is what we want to do here. And here's the disadvantage of doing this, is I have to title it right away. So there's an extra step involved here, but I need to title this layer anyway. And I'm going to title this layer color, because this is the one I'm going to change the color on. Now another way that we can make a layer is that we can right click and we can duplicate the layer. Again, this brings up this window. So it's the same thing, you've already seen this. Another way, without having to bring up the separate window, is to drag this layer down here to the new layer icon. And the new layer icon is right there to the left of the trash can. And then that gives me a new layer without another window popping open. So if I want to rename this layer now, I just double click on the text and I can call that texture, which is what I'm going to take out the blemishes with on this layer here. And actually, you'll see here, I'm not going to use this layer, but what we're going to do is we're going to take out the color and we're going to duplicate the color layer once we got the color correct. Now, if I want to move my layers around, because the order in which we create layers is what's visible on top. So let's say this was a layer that I did some work on. So I did something there, and I want my color layer to be on top of that. I can just drag them to move them around. So I can reorder my layers by dragging them around. I can't move the background layer. The background layer has special properties. So if I go to this texture layer, you'll see here I'm going to erase something here. So let's get this brush a little bigger here. Okay, so an eraser is a brush, just like a paintbrush, and I'm making the brush bigger by holding down the bracket keys on my keyboard. Okay, so this is a quick way to do it. So I erased that, but if I actually see this by itself, you'll see here that this layer here is transparent. So what I erased here now goes to transparency. And when I turn this layer on, the visibility of this layer here, I can see what's underneath this texture layer here. So this is the way the hierarchy of the layers works. Now what's unique about the background is when I erase something on the background layer, what's going to happen is I get to see the background coming in here, which is this color that's set over here. Whatever color is set here is going to be the background color. So if I change that and make that color blue, it's going to show me blue underneath here. That's the background. By default, the background color is white and the foreground color is black. Those are your default colors. And by clicking this little button here, it gets you back to default. These will switch back and forth between the foreground and background. And then you'll also see here, it shows you an X there. So the X key will also do that. So switch foreground and background colors, X. The X key will do that as well if you hold down X. So that's the difference with the background and regular layers. The background has an opaque layer underneath, whereas regular layers are transparent. So now you'll see here in the history, all the things that I did here are in the history. And if I want to go back to the beginning where I was, I can get back there. So that's where I was right from the start when I opened the image. Duplicate layer, I want to use that duplicate layer there. So I'm going to go back to that point. And that's my color layer there. So that should give you a quick overview of layers. And then we're going to be looking at other parts of the layers later. We'll be looking at adjustment layers and we'll be looking at some other stuff as well. Now to start out with, in order to use the color replacement tool, we need to tell the color replacement tool what color we want to use. So we need a sample from a place where it's good color. So the color replacement tool is, where is it? It's underneath the brush tool. So if you hold down B, you'll get to the brush tool, but then you got to click and hold down on the tool itself here to get the drop down and the other tools that are underneath. So every one of these tools that has a little triangle in the bottom right hand corner has other tools underneath it. And if you click and hold down the mouse on the tool, it'll show you what's underneath it. So click and hold down here, and then I'm going to get this color replacement tool. Now, the color replacement tool has a couple different modes here, and depending on what you want to do, you're going to have to select which mode that you want to use here. Okay, if we use color, I'll show you what's going to happen here. It's going to actually apply the color and not really blend it so well. Well, we'll see here. So I'm going to undo that. I got a spot there. First of all, I want to pick the color that I want her face to be, the skin color. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and the Alt key, when I'm using the color brush, is going to allow me to sample somewhere. So let's say this, I don't want really red in here, but let's get maybe this color of her skin here. So I sample that, and I should now see in the foreground color that color as a sample here. Now watch what happens when I start painting on that color. It doesn't look so good, right? Because it's just applying that color as a solid hue, and it's not taking into account anything that's underneath it. So that there's different color variations and different texture underneath there, and it's not taking that into account. So when we do saturation, all saturation is going to do is basically the same color, but it's going to saturate whatever color you started with. It's going to use that saturation. And then luminosity is brightness or darkness, so it will lighten or darken. And look what it does. It doesn't blend very well. The color's a little better, but it doesn't blend well. So the one we want to use in this case is hue. And you're going to use these depending on what you're doing, different colors. Now you'll see here the hue is going to blend the color better. Much better here. Okay, so I'm getting rid of all the red, and I'm getting the color to be consistent throughout the image here. Now, you might not like that color hue, or it might be okay. If the color hue doesn't work for you, all you got to do is go back in your history panel, hold down which key? The Alt key. Try to find another color that you think might be better. Sample it, and then try again till you get the color that you want. And once you've got the color that you want, go through and paint the color on to get everything to be nice and consistent color. So when you get to the areas where you're seeing some detail so that it's hard to get to, you'll notice here too that it's not affecting the blue as I'm painting on here. I can be a little bit off, and it's pretty much just going to sample the skin color here, which is really nice. But if I don't want to get her lips, which I don't, or around her eyes, what I want to do is I want to zoom in. So here's a tool we haven't looked at yet, and that is the zoom tool. Well, let's get all the big stuff here first. And then we can zoom in with the zoom tool. So you see how much better it makes the image look already, just getting the color right. I want to do her ear as well. And if you want to pick a color that has a little red in it still, that's fine. If you don't think that this is natural looking, whatever you think is best, you're the artist here. Okay, so I guess that's like putting on a base layer of makeup. So here's the zoom tool right here, and the zoom tool, there's a couple different things I can do with this that are kind of important, and that is if I want to see the pixels at 1:1. Right now I'm seeing the pixels at 31%, which means we're not seeing the whole size of the image. Photoshop has reduced the image and made it smaller. If I want to see what the actual size of the image is, I double click the zoom tool. And this is the actual size of the image. This is seeing the pixels at 1:1. If I want to fit it in the box again, in my window, I double click on the hand tool. So I can go back and forth. Another thing that's a useful tool for the zoom tool is if you want to just zoom in on an area. Now, in order to do this, you have to uncheck Scrubby Zoom, which by default is on. And what Scrubby Zoom does is it allows you to click on it and drag, and then it'll zoom in. I like to zoom in this way that I'm going to show you better, though. So with Scrubby Zoom unchecked, you can draw a rectangle around the area that you want to zoom into, and it zooms into that area. Okay, and then you can zoom back out again by double clicking the hand tool. Or you can just take the zoom tool and click wherever it is you want to zoom into until you get it to where you want. And wherever you click, it's going to make that the middle. So now I can get my color replacement tool again, and I can get these areas that I missed. Oops, I'm using the wrong tool. Here it is. So I make my brush smaller here and try to get as much of that pink out of there as I can. Now, I don't necessarily want to remove the pink from inner eye because I think that is a natural color there. But if you don't like it, go ahead and get rid of it. Now zoom back out. And then I think this area here I hadn't gotten yet. Yep. And then down around her lips. So I'm moving down right now here using the wheel on my mouse. So that drags me down there. And I can also move around this box in here by moving these around. Another way of doing this is with a window called the Navigator. And by default it's not up. If I go to Window here, I go to Navigator, and you can see this little red box that's in here is where the window is. And I can drag this box around to different areas on the image that I want to look at. Okay, so I want to just get in here and get her lips. Get the red out of the skin, and I'll leave her lips red. And the image is looking better already. Okay, let's zoom back out. And you can see just getting the skin color even, consistent throughout her face, makes a 100% difference in how the image looks. I think there's a little bit of red here that I could also get out from a blemish there. No, maybe it didn't take it out. Well, we'll get it out with something else. And that concludes using the color replacement tool.